There are nights that begin like all the others. Nights that feel ordinary, full of laughter, music, the ordinary magic of being young and alive. Nights where nothing about the first few hours gives any indication of what is coming. September 8th, 2017 was one of those nights. Kenneka Jenkins was 19 years old. She lived with her mother, Teresa Martin, in Chicago, Illinois, a city of neighborhoods, of tight-knit communities, of families who look out for one another. By all accounts, Kenneka was a typical young woman. She loved her friends. She loved music. She loved her family. She was not a troublemaker. She was not someone who courted danger. She was someone who was 19 years old and doing what 19-year-olds do. On that Friday night, Kenneka made plans to attend a party being held at the Crowne Plaza Hotel in Rosemont, Illinois, a suburb that sits just outside Chicago's city limits, close to O'Hare International Airport. The hotel was a large, busy property, the kind of place that hosts corporate conferences, weddings, and weekend gatherings. On this particular night, several rooms on an upper floor had been rented out for a party. Music, people, the noise of a weekend. Kenneka arrived with a group of friends. She was one of several young women and men who attended the gathering that night. The party was not an unusual event. It was a social gathering among young people, the kind that happens in cities and suburbs across America every single weekend. Nothing about the evening's beginning suggested that it would be anything other than a normal night. But Kenneka Jenkins never came home. This is Shadow, and welcome back again in my channel with a new story. Hope you enjoy. The Crowne Plaza Hotel in Rosemont, Illinois is a large, modern property, part of a global hotel chain known for hosting business travelers and events. It sits near O'Hare International Airport, in a suburb characterized by convention centers, restaurants, and the kind of commercial infrastructure that grows up around major transit hubs. It is not a boutique hotel. It is not intimate. It is the kind of place where hundreds of guests move through every single day, checking in, checking out, navigating long corridors, riding elevators, ordering room service, passing strangers in hallways without a second glance. Hotels like this one are, in many ways, small cities. They have their own geography, public spaces and private ones, front-of-house areas designed for guests and back-of-house areas meant only for staff, service corridors, linen rooms, storage areas, industrial kitchens, and, in many large commercial hotels, walk-in refrigerators and freezers, the kind used to store food for the hotel's restaurant operations. These are not spaces that guests typically access. They are staff-only areas, tucked behind unmarked doors, at the end of hallways that most visitors would never find their way into. On the night of September 8th, 2017, the Crowne Plaza in Rosemont was doing what it always did, operating as a busy commercial hotel. Multiple events were happening across the property. Guests were moving through hallways. Staff were working their shifts. And on one of the upper floors, a private party was in full swing. The party Kenneka attended was not a hotel-sponsored event. It was a privately organized gathering, a group of young people who had rented hotel rooms and were spending a Friday night together. This is an important detail. The hotel's staff were not supervising or monitoring the gathering in any organized way. It was, from the hotel's perspective, simply a collection of paying guests occupying rooms on an upper floor. What happened over the course of that night, what transpired inside those hotel rooms, in those hallways, and in the spaces where Kenneka Jenkins eventually found herself, would become the subject of enormous controversy, investigation, and grief. The surveillance footage captured by the Crowne Plaza Hotel's cameras would become one of the most scrutinized pieces of video evidence in recent true crime history. Hundreds of thousands of people would watch, re-watch, pause, zoom, and analyze every frame, searching for answers, for clues, for something the official narrative might have missed. What that footage shows is this: Kenneka Jenkins, sometime in the early morning hours of September 9th, 2017, moving through the hotel's corridors alone. She is visibly disoriented. She moves erratically, pressing against walls, losing her balance, struggling to maintain a straight path. She appears deeply impaired. She does not appear to be in control of her body in the way that a sober person would be. She navigates, if that word can even be applied to someone in that state, through a series of hallways, through what appears to be a service area of the hotel, and eventually into a section of the building that ordinary hotel guests would have no reason to be in. She passes through unmarked doors. She moves deeper into the back-of-house areas of the property. At some point during this journey through the hotel, Kenneka Jenkins entered a walk-in industrial freezer, and she did not come back out. The exact sequence of events leading to that moment, how she came to be in the state she was in, why she was alone in a service corridor in the early hours of the morning, who last saw her before the cameras picked her up, and why no one intervened. These are the questions that have haunted this case from the beginning. According to accounts from people who were at the party, the night had begun normally. Music was playing. People were socializing. At some point, something changed. Friends later reported that Kenneka became increasingly disoriented as the night progressed. Some suggested she had been drinking. Others noted that her behavior seemed to go beyond what alcohol alone might explain. What the toxicology report would later confirm is that Kenneka had alcohol in her system. It also detected topiramate, a prescription anticonvulsant medication sometimes prescribed for migraines or epilepsy. Topiramate is known to cause severe dizziness, disorientation, cognitive impairment, and unsteadiness on its feet, effects that are dramatically amplified when combined with alcohol. The combination could absolutely account for the behavior seen on the surveillance footage. But the presence of that medication raised questions of its own. Was Kenneka taking topiramate herself, a prescription she had been given? Or had she been given it by someone else without her knowledge? In the days and weeks that followed, these questions would become central to the public debate surrounding her death. Teresa Martin did not sleep that night. When her daughter failed to return home and stopped responding to calls and messages, Teresa did what any mother would do. She began to search. She called the hotel. She called Kenneka's friends. She reached out to anyone who might know where her daughter was. And when she could not get answers over the phone, she went to the Crowne Plaza herself, arriving in the early morning hours of September 9th, 2017, demanding that the hotel search for her daughter. What happened next became one of the most painful and controversial elements of the entire case. According to Teresa Martin and those who were with her, the hotel was slow to respond. Staff did not immediately initiate a thorough search of the property. Hours passed. Teresa continued to press for action. The hotel continued to move at what seemed, from a grieving mother's perspective, like an unacceptable pace. This delay, whether it was the result of bureaucratic caution, inadequate training, indifference, or something more concerning, became a source of enormous anger for Kenneka's family and for the broader public that would soon be watching. It was not until the following day, September 10th, 2017, that hotel staff, conducting a search of the property, discovered Kenneka Jenkins' body inside the walk-in freezer in the hotel's kitchen area. She had been there, in the cold, while her mother waited in the lobby above, while her friends searched the surrounding area. While hours ticked by, Teresa Martin's reaction to the news of her daughter's death is not something that requires description. Any parent who can imagine that moment, the phone call, or the person walking toward them with that expression on their face, understands what that does to a human being. Some grief cannot be narrated. It can only be acknowledged. What can be said is that Teresa Martin did not fold. She did not retreat into silence. She became, in the days and weeks that followed, one of the most vocal and determined advocates for her daughter, demanding answers, demanding accountability, refusing to accept a story that she felt left too many questions unanswered. The official investigation into the death of Kenneka Jenkins was conducted by the Rosemont Department of Public Safety, with involvement from other law enforcement agencies. Investigators reviewed hours of surveillance footage from the hotel's camera system, dozens of angles, multiple floors, service corridors, parking lots. They interviewed witnesses. They gathered testimony from the people who had been at the party that night. They spoke with hotel staff. They collected evidence from the scene. And ultimately, they released a set of findings that would define the official narrative of what happened, a narrative that many people, including Kenneka's own mother, would never fully accept. The official conclusion of the investigation was this: Kenneka Jenkins, significantly impaired by alcohol and topiramate, wandered away from the party alone. She navigated through the hotel's back-of-house areas, finding her way into service corridors and utility spaces that, while staff only in intention, were apparently not effectively secured against a disoriented guest who happened to push open unmarked doors. She entered the walk-in freezer. The door closed behind her. She was unable to get out. She died of hypothermia. The autopsy, conducted by the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office, confirmed hypothermia as the cause of death. The manner of death was listed as accident. No foul play was identified. No criminal charges were filed against anyone in connection with Kenneka's death. The investigation was closed. For the investigators who worked this case, the surveillance footage was considered the most significant piece of evidence. They could see Kenneka, on camera, moving through those hallways alone. They could trace her path, step by step, from the party floor to the service areas to the kitchen corridor. From their perspective, the footage told the story. It showed a young woman who was deeply impaired, who had wandered alone into a part of the hotel she should not have been in, and who had not been able to find her way back out. But for many who watched that same footage, and for Kenneka's family, the official findings raised as many questions as they answered. The questions began almost immediately. They came from journalists, from legal commentators, from true crime analysts, from ordinary people who watched the surveillance footage and found themselves unable to reconcile what they were seeing with the official explanation. The first and most fundamental question was this: how does a 19-year-old girl, even one who is severely impaired, navigate from a party floor through a large commercial hotel, find her way into a staff-only service corridor, open the door to an industrial walk-in freezer, and enter it, all without a single hotel employee noticing, intervening, or redirecting her? Large commercial hotels have staff working overnight in kitchen areas, in maintenance, in security. The freezer where Kenneka was found was in a kitchen area, a part of the hotel where employees should have been present. How was it possible that she entered that space and remained there without being found for the better part of a day? The second question concerned the hotel's response to Teresa Martin. When a mother arrives at a hotel and reports that her 19-year-old daughter is missing on the premises, what is the protocol? What should staff do? Critics of the Crowne Plaza's handling of that night argued that the hotel's response was woefully inadequate, that a more urgent search of the property, initiated earlier, could have saved Kenneka's life. The third question concerned the topiramate. The medical examiner's report confirmed its presence in Kenneka's system. If Kenneka was not prescribed this medication, and her family has stated they were not aware of her taking it, then where did it come from? Topiramate is a prescription drug. It is not a recreational substance. It is not something that typically appears at parties. Its presence in Kenneka's system demanded, in the view of many observers, a more thorough investigation into how it got there. The fourth question was about the friends who were with Kenneka that night. When she became visibly disoriented, why did none of them ensure she was safe? Why did she end up alone in a hotel hallway in that condition? Were they aware of how impaired she was? Did anyone try to stop her from wandering? These are questions that speak not necessarily to criminal culpability, but to the human responsibility we have for one another, especially for our friends when they are vulnerable. None of these questions, in isolation, proves foul play. The investigators who closed the case had considered them and concluded that the evidence pointed to accident. But for Kenneka's family and for a significant portion of the public, the official narrative felt incomplete, like a story that was technically possible but emotionally and logically unsatisfying. In the weeks and months before the Kenneka Jenkins case, the world had already seen what social media could do with a story that touched a nerve. By September 2017, platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube had matured into powerful vehicles for collective attention, capable of amplifying a story from obscurity to national prominence in a matter of hours. The Kenneka Jenkins case became one of the most significant examples of social media-driven true crime investigation in American history. Within days of her death becoming public, the story was everywhere. Facebook live streams dedicated to discussing the case attracted tens of thousands of simultaneous viewers. YouTube videos analyzing the surveillance footage accumulated millions of views. Twitter hashtags trended nationally. Much of this attention was driven by grief and by a genuine desire for justice. Many of the people who engaged with the case did so because they cared, because they saw in Kenneka's story echoes of broader conversations about race, about the treatment of colored women and girls when they go missing or are harmed, about the systems that are supposed to protect people and sometimes fail to do so. At the same time, the social media attention brought with it elements that complicated the pursuit of truth. As is almost inevitable in high-profile cases in the social media era, speculation quickly moved beyond the available evidence. Theories emerged, some plausible, some implausible, some based on misreadings of the footage, some based on fabricated or misattributed claims. The sheer volume of voices made it increasingly difficult to separate careful analysis from conspiracy. People who had been at the party received online harassment. Individuals with no connection to the case were falsely identified as suspects and had their information shared publicly, a phenomenon known as doxing that caused real harm to innocent people. The community of online investigators that formed around the case was, at its best, a force for accountability and public attention. At its worst, a source of misinformation and targeted harassment. This duality, social media as both a powerful tool for justice and a chaotic amplifier of misinformation, would become one of the defining features of how the Kenneka Jenkins case was experienced by the American public. When the criminal investigation failed to produce charges, Teresa Martin pursued a different avenue: civil litigation. In 2018, she filed a lawsuit against the Crowne Plaza Hotel and its parent company, alleging negligence in connection with her daughter's death. The lawsuit raised several significant claims. It alleged that the hotel had failed to maintain adequate security on its premises. It alleged that the hotel's staff had not responded appropriately when Teresa Martin reported her daughter missing. It alleged that the hotel's facilities, specifically the freezer where Kenneka was found, had not been properly secured, allowing an impaired guest to access a dangerous area. Civil lawsuits operate under different standards than criminal prosecutions. In a criminal case, guilt must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. In a civil case, the standard is the preponderance of evidence, essentially, whether the defendant was more likely than not responsible for the harm in question. Civil litigation also allows families to pursue accountability through monetary damages even when criminal charges are not pursued. The details of the civil litigation, its proceedings, and its ultimate resolution are a matter of legal record. What matters, for the purposes of understanding this case, is that Teresa Martin's legal action represented her refusal to accept the end of the official investigation as the end of the story. It was a mother's insistence that someone be held accountable for the circumstances that led to her daughter's death. Whether the hotel bore legal responsibility for what happened that night, through inadequate security, inadequate search procedures, inadequate facility management, is a question that the legal process was designed to address. What is not a question is that the circumstances of Kenneka Jenkins' death revealed gaps in hotel security, in staff training, in the systems that are supposed to keep guests safe. A 19-year-old woman wandered, alone and severely impaired, through a large commercial hotel, entered a walk-in freezer, and died there. Regardless of how she came to be in that state, regardless of every other contested element of this case, that basic reality points to failures of system and of oversight that have implications beyond this single tragedy. Over the course of the public debate surrounding this case, a range of professionals with relevant expertise offered their perspectives. Forensic pathologists weighed in on the toxicology findings. Security consultants spoke to the question of hotel liability. Pharmacologists discussed the effects of topiramate. Legal experts analyzed the investigation's conduct. On the pharmacological question, the consensus among medical professionals is clear. The combination of alcohol and topiramate is dangerous. Topiramate can cause significant central nervous system depression on its own. Combined with alcohol, those effects are amplified. A person under the influence of both substances can experience extreme dizziness, confusion, cognitive impairment, difficulty walking, and an inability to accurately assess their own physical state or environment. The behavior visible in the surveillance footage, the stumbling, the disorientation, the apparent inability to navigate even a simple hallway, is entirely consistent with this kind of combined intoxication. On the security question, hospitality security consultants have noted that the circumstances of Kenneka's death, specifically, her ability to access staff-only areas and enter an industrial freezer, would represent a failure of facility management at most professionally operated hotels. Walk-in freezers in commercial kitchens are typically required to have interior release mechanisms precisely because accidental entrapment is a recognized hazard. Whether the freezer in question had such a mechanism, and whether it functioned properly, is a question that has not been fully resolved in the public record. On the investigation itself, Legal experts have noted that the case was handled within normal parameters for a death investigation in which foul play is not immediately apparent. The surveillance footage, combined with the toxicology results and the autopsy findings, provided investigators with a consistent narrative that pointed toward accident. Without evidence pointing toward a specific individual who might have harmed Kenneka, prosecutors had no basis for criminal charges. What these expert perspectives collectively illuminate is the complexity of this case. There is no single element that definitively proves either the official narrative or any alternative theory. The evidence is consistent with accident. The evidence also leaves room that Kenneka's family and many members of the public have filled with grief, suspicion, and unanswered questions. Years have passed since the death of Kenneka Jenkins. The official investigation has been closed. The civil litigation has moved through the legal system. The social media storm has subsided, as social media storms always eventually do, absorbed into the vast archive of cases and controversies that the internet holds and forgets in unequal measure. What we know, with reasonable certainty, is this: Kenneka Jenkins attended a party at the Crowne Plaza Hotel in Rosemont, Illinois on the night of September 8, 2017. She became severely impaired by alcohol and by topiramate, which was found in her system. She was captured on surveillance footage wandering alone through the hotel's corridors and back-of-house areas. She entered an industrial walk-in freezer. She was found dead the following day. The medical examiner ruled her death a case of hypothermia, manner of death accidental. No criminal charges were ever filed. What we do not know, what remains genuinely, meaningfully unresolved, is also significant. We do not know with absolute certainty how topiramate came to be in Kenneka's system, or whether she was aware she had consumed it. We do not know the full details of what happened at the party before she was seen on surveillance footage. We do not know whether the hotel could have found her sooner if it had responded more urgently to Teresa Martin's pleas. We do not know whether the freezer she entered had a functional interior release mechanism. We do not know what the full truth of that night looks like. That gap between what we know and what we don't is where grief lives. It is where suspicion takes root. It is where a mother's unanswered questions go to stay. When an official investigation closes a case and says accident, it does so based on the available evidence. But it cannot answer every question. And the questions that remain don't disappear simply because the investigation has ended. The hardest thing to hold in any case like this one is the possibility that something terrible can happen, something that causes profound loss, that raises legitimate questions about how institutions responded, that occurs within a context of broader systemic failures, and still not yield to a clean narrative of deliberate wrongdoing. Accidents, when they happen to real people who are loved, do not feel accidental. They feel like something that could have been prevented, and often, as in this case, they could have been. On September 8, 2017, a 19-year-old young woman from Chicago named Kenneka Jenkins went to a hotel party with her friends. She never came home. Her mother, Teresa Martin, spent the early hours of September 9th at the Crowne Plaza Hotel, fighting for someone, anyone, to help find her daughter. By the time Kenneka was found, it was too late. Kenneka Jenkins deserved better. She deserved friends who kept her safe when she was vulnerable. She deserved hotel staff who noticed a young woman in distress and intervened. She deserved a search that began sooner. She deserved systems of hospitality, of safety, of institutional accountability that functioned as they should. She deserved to go home. Her case is not simply a mystery, though mystery surrounds it. It is a reckoning with what happens when a young woman is left alone in a state of dangerous vulnerability, and the systems that might have saved her are slow, or absent, or inadequate. It is a reckoning with the disparities in whose stories are told, whose deaths are investigated with urgency, whose grief is treated as worthy of public attention. It is a reckoning with the limits of what we can know and the weight of what we cannot. Teresa Martin has never stopped fighting for her daughter. She has appeared in media, spoken at community events, filed legal actions, and kept Kenneka's name alive in a world that too often forgets too quickly. That, too, is part of Kenneka's story. The love that outlasts the tragedy. The mother who refuses to let her daughter be reduced to a social media trending topic or a closed case file. The insistence that a young woman from Chicago was a person, with a life, a future, a family who loved her, and that her death matters. It does matter. It always will. And that was it for today. Hope you liked it. If you have a story in mind, let me know to talk about it for you. See you next time.